tap that to my heart. Won't you tap that so I can start?
Greetings, love posse. Today's conversation: does God of the Bible really exist? Let's talk about it. I understand this is a big and sensitive topic, but it's time I talk about it. I understand that this topic may trigger people. It may cause strong emotion. And yet, we still must talk about it. It's not about proving that God of the Bible, the Christian Bible, exists. It's not about preaching. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about exploration, exploring this question. Does God of the Bible really exist? Whether you believe he, right? Whether you believe he exists, whether you doubt it, whether you don't know. This space, again, is for all of us to explore this question. Does God of the Bible really exist? We're going to explore this question together. Why does this matter? It matters because this God that many of us have been conditioned and indoctrinated and forced to believe in impacts our life, impacts our love, who we can love, impacts hope, whether we have hope. It makes meaning of so many things. It's important because for so long, religious institutions, governments have been using this God, this Christian God in the Bible to oppress and suppress and control and manipulate and deceive the masses. Since I was 6 years old, I've been thinking about this God of the Bible. I've said this a number of times. My mother was Christian, but she converted to Islam. So she was and still is a Black Muslim. My dad's side of the family, Primitive Baptist Christians. And at 6, I could see from both religions something was not right, for lack of a better word. I was questioning since 6, and I'm 57 now. And throughout my life, I've just been questioning. I remember I had a best friend, and she would always say, God doesn't exist. We don't believe in that. She's Australian. And she would say, we don't believe in God. God doesn't exist. And so we would have these conversations, and I would say yes, and she would say no. But it was, we were best friends. So we held space for each other. It wasn't these ugly conversations that people have that hold strongly to their belief. I have always been open to listening to someone else's perspective and then making up my own mind, hearing something and thinking, that's a good point. I can see that. And so that's what this conversation is about. Us exploring whether God of the Bible really exists. What do I mean about God? Again, I'm focusing on God in the Christian Bible because there are many religions who have their own views about God. There are different cultures who have their own views about God. But I grew up, as I mentioned, partly in the church, a Christian church, and I'm talking about the God in the Christian Bible. There's also, as someone who has moved from religion into spirituality, I have an understanding that God is just the name people have given that which they do not understand, that which is nameless. So, from a spiritual perspective, I understand this God as a higher intelligence, source, energy. In indigenous cultures, this God is named or called the Great Mystery. And that so resonates with me because this is a great mystery. I also understand there are people who see God as a frequency, and they call it the God frequency. So, as I mentioned, there are many views about what Christians have termed God. And this God, this Christian God in the Bible, that many people who practice Christianity, many people in a community, a black-bodied community, Latino communities, Irish communities, all over the world that practice Christianity. Their idea, their description of this God, their concept, their context comes from these many versions of the Bible written by men, mostly, if not all, white men. So that's the God I'm talking about. The God in these Bibles, these versions of these Bibles, that God that is jealous and becomes angry and vindictive and destroys things and seems to hate women and gays. That God, right? Because that's what these books tell us, show us, have written. That's what these men have written, that this God in these books does. Then, it was the God of the Old Testament. Oh, he was really horrendous. And then they made the God a little more loving. You see what I'm getting at? His story of this God in the Bible. That's the God I'm referring to. That's the God I'm wondering, I'm curious about whether he really exists. This same God, I don't know if you've watched the documentary Bad Faith, but this same God, it's interesting. In this movie, it's about Christian nationalists. And many of them, those in this documentary, believe that they are favored, that they are the chosen ones, that God, this God, Christian God in the Bible, favors them so much that they were rewarded with wealth. Again, questioning. So this God of the Bible seems to hate poor people and seems to continually award the rich, according to the perspective of Christian nationalists. So I'm just throwing these things out there, which I would love for you to consider, comment about, reflect on as we go through this conversation. What are some reasons people believe in this God in the Bible? Culture, right? Environment, society, upbringing, being forced, right? Because my ancestors were enslaved, forced to denounce, give up their religion, and accept Christianity. In Australia, Aboriginal people forced by missionaries to give up their practices and beliefs and accept Christianity. Some indigenous native people in the United States, again, forced to give up their practices, spiritual practices and beliefs, and accept Christianity. So some reasons people believe in this God of the Bible also has to do with being forced to, being conditioned, being indoctrinated, along with culture and upbringing. What are some other reasons people believe in this God of the Bible? Well, moral grounding, purpose, personal experiences, like experiencing miracles or prayers being answered. What are some reasons people don't believe or doubt that the God of the Bible exists? Famine, suffering, no scientific evidence, it's not logical. Personal experiences, religions, history of control, conflict, deceit, and manipulation, discrimination by many religions and churches of women and LGBTQ community, the poor. The idea that this God of the Bible seems silent and hidden, right? Where is he? Where is he now when we need him? Where is he? What is he doing as all this stuff is going on around the world and particularly in the United States? Where is he? Silent and hidden. And then also this God of the Bible can seem heartless and unconscious, right? Allowing these things to happen. So people believe this God allows these things to happen. All this suffering. If this God really exists, why is he allowing these things to happen? Sitting back and just observing, watching. Or maybe he is working behind the scenes. Is he pulling the strings? My perspective on this question. As I mentioned, since 6 years old, I question. I will tell you, I have always battled this God of the Bible. When I say battled, people would tell me one thing: you can't do this because of God. This God of the Bible, I really didn't like. This God of the Bible seemed more human than like a God. This God of the Bible seemed like, this white man, was made in the image of the oppressor, the colonizer. So I never really resonated with this God of the Bible. And this conversation has been a long time coming. As I have evolved, this question has always been there. Does this God of the Bible really exist? One of my favorite spiritual teachers is J. Krishnamurti. And I've watched a number of his conversations, and he has spoken on this topic a number of times, where he has said this God doesn't exist, that man created God from thought, that actually thought created God. Now, when I heard that, maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe, right away, I knew this resonates with me. Because I've been on this journey, and as I mentioned, this question has just been looming. I remember one time, 2001, after 9/11, I was really thinking about this. Where is this God? Does this God exist? And I was a little fearful, because my upbringing had taught me, well, you don't question God. If you ask these sort of questions, God is going to strike you down. The God of wrath. So I still persisted in asking this question. No one has struck me down. Because really, I don't believe that the God in the Bibles, in those versions of the Bible, exists. I believe God, like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, are social human constructs that thought, mind, created God because people couldn't explain things that they saw. So white men of the church created this God, and they rewrite this book of parables to suit their whim, their politics, their religious political politics, right? Their gender politics, the sexual orientation politics. They just rewrite and rewrite his story, because I never believed that God was a white man. Woman, maybe. And there are many cultures out there that do have goddesses. Some cultures have both male and female deities. But it just seemed odd that here I am looking the way I do in this earth suit, in this avatar, in this costume. My ancestors come with a different view, an ethnocentric view of spirituality, and then they are forced to become Christian. And that's what people who look like me still practice, not questioning. I believe in higher intelligence. I believe in source energy. I believe in the great mystery. But do I believe that there's a white man with blonde hair sitting in the sky, pulling the strings? Of course not. Because if there actually was some white man in the sky, God pulling the strings, why is the world the way it is? Why are people who Christian Bible says made in God's image, if they were made in God's image, then there has to be something wrong with this God? Because look at human beings. Think about it. Look at human beings. Look how they behave and treat each other. If they were made in this God's image, in any God's image, then something must be wrong with that God. Which led me to thinking, this God doesn't exist. This God is just a character written in a book. And he changes depending on the writer of the book. This God doesn't exist. That's why the world is the way it is, because this God is not in control of anything. We are creating this reality, these worlds. We are, through thought, like we created the God of the Bible. God of the Bible, in my perspective, was created by man, white men in particular, from thought. Just like this camera, just like Santa Claus, just like AI, just like the Easter Bunny, all created from thought. And the more people wake up, I think they're going to begin to realize that the concept, the idea of the God, this God in the Bible, has not worked for them. And the reason why has not worked for them, hasn't worked for Latino community, hasn't worked for the Black community, right? LGBTQ community, A lot of people already know God doesn't love us. Women hasn't worked for women because this God in the Bible put men over women. Just doesn't make sense that God has favorites. No, sounds like some bullshit humans would come up with, because humans have preferences. So humans, white men, created a God with human characteristics: jealousy, anger, right? Destructive, just behavior that's not loving nor conscious. And then on top of that, Jesus. How can Jesus be both God's only begotten Son and God at the same time? You ever thought about that? Is Jesus schizophrenic? I don't know. Maybe Jesus doesn't know he's also God. No. Man chooses to believe what man wants to believe, so that man can feel safe and secure in man's own little world with things that he or she doesn't understand, has no working knowledge of, no conscious knowing of. So what do? We make up things so we won't lose our mind. Another thing about Jesus, I did some research. I don't know if many of you are aware that it wasn't until 1524 that an Italian author and grammarian, Gian Trishino, I know I'm butchering his name, invented the letter J. Before that, I was used as both I and J, but it wasn't until 1524 that he introduced the letter J into English. But it wasn't until 1633 that the letter J was actually written in English print text. So, in Jesus's time, there was no letter J. So, I-E-S-U-S, Isus. I don't know. Throw it out. Look it up for yourself. Because I believe this God of the Bible was invented. This God of the Bible just hates so many people. People who look like me, people of color, gays, women, even children. And when I say women, think about it, right? We've been told the story that Eve ate of the tree of knowledge, and so she was punished. And what was her punishment? To bear children. Then we have the Christian right, the Christian nationalists telling us, this whole thing about abortion. Not only Christian nationalists, but so many people, they are anti-choice, a woman's right to choose. I think part of that is because I don't think most of these people truly care about children anyway, especially children that are already alive, and it's based on their behavior. But if you think about it, if it was Eve's or a woman's punishment for disobeying God to bear children, then all this talk about children are a blessing, and I believe they are a blessing, but based on that story, God didn't consider them a blessing. It was a punishment for women to bear children. And I think in some people's minds that having control over a woman's body and forcing her to bear children is reinforcing God's punishment of women, making them bear children. I'm just throwing this out. Again, something to think about. No one ever talks about this. But that's what the book said, right? God's punishment was to make women bear children. I don't think when people wrote this book, or these many different versions, I don't think they were thinking this. But I know many people, they just gonna believe what they believe, and that's okay. I'm okay with whatever you believe. Just don't force your belief on me. That's my only issue. I can hold space and hold both. Belief, those who believe in this God of the Bible, and those like me who believe the God of the Bible is invented. I can hold space for both. Both can coexist. In my reality, in my consciousness, the only thing that I will not stand for are people who believe this God of the Bible exists, want to preserve their belief, and the way they preserve their belief is to try to control those who don't believe what they believe. And again, that's kind of like the God of the Bible, right? You don't believe, you question, I will burn you. Again, are you getting, what I'm communicating? You have this God who can't stand anyone to question him or go against him. And when they do, he harms them. That sounds like some humans to me. That sounds like a bunch of masculine energy run amok. One last thing about my personal reflection. I can see source, higher intelligence, great mystery in everything, in every living being. No high or low, all equal, all expressions of this great mystery. People have made it, religions have made it, this seems like, to me, my perspective, this competition. My God versus your God. Made this God a proponent of separation, of dividing, competition, of comparing. Again, seems all invented to me. So, can we ever really know? I always, when I have these conversations with a friend of mine, I say, well, we'll all know the truth when we drop the body and we return home, wherever home is, whatever home, when we are in spirit, as spirit, whatever that means to you. That's when we will truly know. Because can anyone ever truly know? I will, from my lived experience, I will continue to believe that there is something greater than myself, but that energy, that source, that higher intelligence is me, and that I create my own reality, that we together have created collectively this 3D reality. And because we have the power to create, like source energy, like higher consciousness, we are in essence gods. We create life and death. We have thoughts and we contemplate thoughts. We have imagination, and that which we think we can manifest. To me, those are the powers of gods. Something else to think about. My final thoughts. Sometimes the question is more powerful than the answer. I encourage all of you to be curious, to be open-minded. I encourage all of you to think and ponder, reflect on this conversation and this question: does God of the Bible really exist? I encourage all of you to suspend any kind of judgment. I encourage all of you, if you do believe that God, the God in the Bible, exists, please do not force your belief on others. I believe that people who are adamant about forcing their beliefs on others, that is actually a cover-up for their disbelief, for their questioning, that they are in fear. They have to hang on to this, because if it is not true, if it's not real, if it doesn't exist, then what? Most people are more comfortable believing something that is not true than questioning, than being open, than the uncertainty, than the not knowing. It's about exploring and curiosity, not fear. I encourage you to end judgment. None of us has any place to judge. I encourage you to work on any fear, even around this topic. Fear based on your upbringing and culture, that even if you even question, something will happen to you. It will only happen to you if you believe it. because you are controlling your own thoughts. Nothing has happened to me because I truly believe there's no white man in the sky pulling anybody's strings. The only strings that are being pulled are the strings of the mind. Not knowing is okay. Because does anyone really know? I'm okay. Are you okay? Whether you believe, doubt, or just don't know. You have to be okay with that. So here's your call to action. Reflect on what you believe. Does God of the Bible really exist? Are you God, a God? Things to think about. I ask you to please leave a comment because we all can learn from each other. We all can grow from each other. I remind you, there is no right or wrong, good or bad. Again, concepts that humans created, right, wrong, good, bad. Just be open. Go out in nature. Think about it. Do you see yourself in nature and nature in you? Can you see that none of us really know? We are just coming up with explanations for things that we don't have enough information to even understand. I don't think any of us even have the consciousness to even understand. We're working from our own limited consciousness and trying to make sense of things so that we don't go insane. I don't know. We don't feel discomfort. Well, thank you for your time. Please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment if this conversation resonated with you. Does God of the Bible really exist? Peace and love to and for all sentient beings.